Welcome to Back from the Abyss. I'm Dr. Craig Heacock. A couple of items before we move into today's story. First, in light of some of the things I discussed 2 episodes ago in the 20 Years of Psychiatry Insights and Pearls episode, I wanted to share with all of you a recent story about a session gone bad. And I got approval with the patient to discuss this case. And I think this story is interesting because it combines some of the elements I talked about in that 20-year episode. And I think you all might find this interesting. Basically, if you remember, I talked about some of the problems with video sessions, how we can unconsciously and unintentionally hurt our patients and clients, this ongoing necessity of constant self-examination, and also how our personal strengths can actually become weaknesses in the clinical setting. So basically what happened was this. I did a video session with this really sweet woman who I'd been seeing for depression and anxiety. It's about 3 months ago. And we've been trying to get her off benzos. And she's very physiologically and psychologically dependent. And she's really been struggling. And I said, well, let's do a family session with her husband. And she lives far away. And I said, let's just do it by video. So I'd never met her husband. So they pop on the screen. And, we have seemingly nice connection, and I kind of launch into the topic of how to get her off benzos. What happened was, I know I had no idea how much dread and panic she was having. I mean, I could tell on the screen that she was nervous. She's very hesitant. And I was really pushing her and saying, you can do this. And I knew when we hung up from the video session that it hadn't gone well, but I didn't know how badly until she contacted me again a few weeks ago, and she admitted that she was just crushed at how I had treated her, that I hadn't heard her, that I hadn't read her fear. And as she and I talked, first of all, I thanked her profusely for reaching out to me because, empathic repairs are crucial for this work we do in psychotherapy. I realized a few things had happened. And number one thing I think is, on video, and I talked about this in the 20-year Pearl episode, on video, you get words and you can see people, but you miss their energy, you miss their chi, you miss kind of the psychospiritual energetic dimension. And I couldn't tell how far into dread and doom and panic she was. I could tell she was scared, but I just couldn't read her fear. And I know if I'd been sitting in the room with her, it would have been palpable. Another thing that happened was, I think, we are all made up of different parts. And, I have a therapist, psychiatrist part, but I also have a competitive runner part, and I also have a coach part because I've been a coach. And I think what happened in this meeting is I was getting a little frustrated. And so I sort of unconsciously flipped out of my therapist role into the competitive runner / coach role. And I was really pushing her, like, you can do this, come on, suck it up. And as I review the session, I think I was really treating her like an athlete who was tentative about a workout and knowing, she can suffer more than she can ever imagine. And also myself as a competitive runner, knowing that, when you start suffering, that's when you got to push harder. But all that did was serve to alienate her. And it was only in my conversation a couple of weeks ago with her that I realized that, with the disconnect of the video session, I had unknowingly kind of slipped into these other roles that were really toxic for her. So I think this case brings together so many interesting things. One is empathic repair. I think she and I are starting to do the work to repair that. Some of the problems with distance sessions, namely that you miss so much of the energetic kind of psychospiritual aspect of the session. This idea of holding up the mirror, that even when the last thing I wanted to do was hurt her. And in that session, I really hurt her. And I didn't mean to, but I just, again, unknowingly fell into these other ways of being that were super unempathic. So I want to apologize to her and want to thank her for letting me share this story. And I hope it can help some of you in the audience, whether you've been on the receiving end of a psychotherapist's empathic failure, or whether you're a therapist who has committed or will commit those. Second issue, second announcement. I am planning to be in the San Francisco Bay Area in early June to record a couple stories. So anyone out there, Back from the Abyss listeners, any of you live near or in the Bay Area or going to be in the Bay Area early June, and you possibly want to share your story, reach out to me through my website and we'll chat and see if that might be a good thing for you. All right, let's jump into the story. I've been going through the listener surveys, and thank you so much, all of you, for filling those out. So helpful. And we've had multiple requests to do a story on adoption and also to delve further into early childhood attachment trauma. And so, voila, here it is. This is the first of a two-part series on adoption, attachment, and identity. Part one today is the story of Shae. She was adopted as a baby from South Korea and raised in Wichita, Kansas, in a family of Swedish descent. I found myself so moved as I witnessed her story, starting with her initial attachment wounds and subsequent heartbreak, then her shocking betrayal, and finally the way her inner light and resilience guided her to where she is today. A mother, a business owner, an adoptee voice of strength and compassion. There's a lot of wisdom in this story, and I'm so excited for all of you to hear it.
I understand adoption to be a fundamental trauma, a disruption of time, place, and belonging in the world, inflicted from separation from the nuclear family. To be excised from one's biological clan is a primal wound, no matter what happens afterward.
That's so powerful. Yeah, that was the first thing you wrote when I emailed you.
Yeah.
Why don't we start from the beginning, from your birth and what unfolded in the years after that?
Well, I was born in 1970 in South Korea. And the first 9 months of my life are based on what my adopted mom told me. And to be quite clear, I don't know if it's factual, but this story carried me through to this point, so I appreciate it. My birth mother kept me for 9 months, which was a pretty tremendous feat at that time in that culture because of the taboo of being an unwed mother. So my understanding is she worked in the back of the dress shop. Like, she wasn't even able to work out in the front and interact with the public. Again, I don't know if this is true, but it lends itself to the idea that, she was out in the open and yet still very hidden. So she did her best with little support, and at 9 months, when I was 9 months old, that's when she relinquished me for adoption. She took me to the orphanage herself, which is also, it's also another thing of note because it was quite common to, abandon your baby. And in South Korea, they have, my understanding is they have a very organized system, actually, to facilitate that, where, a mother can leave her infant at like a fire station or, a police station, and then they will take the child to the orphanage. And what's also remarkable about that is that I have my birth name, I have my birth date.
What was your birth name?
My birth name was Eun Jin Lee, E-U-N, and I'm probably not even pronouncing that right. It's difficult to say. And what is significant about that is there are many adoptees that I've heard about and heard their stories where, the orphanage workers named them and, had to guess their age. And so some people don't even have, that basic information. So that was the biggest gift that my mother gave me, was just that one single route to her.
Mm-hmm. How long were you in the orphanage?
Well, it took 9 months until I arrived here in the States. So within that 9-month interim period between relinquishment and when I arrived here, I think my records show that I had 2 different foster families. So there was a series of, other relinquishments and attachments that were stunted. And yeah. And this is, my understanding is at 9 months of age, that's a really critical time in human brain development, because that's when the child understands I am separate from Mom, but I'm okay if she leaves because she'll come back.
Mm-hmm.
So
it seems like that's sort of the time period of trust versus mistrust, where the baby is sort of knowing on a deeply unconscious but profound level, like, is the world a safe, predictable, welcoming, nurturing place, or is it unpredictable and perhaps even unsafe and unnurturing?
Right. And so, yeah, sadly, my mother went away and she didn't come back. And then I was, put in a series of different situations with people I did not know. And it informed my sense of self, my sense of safety and trust in relationships that, it would take me decades to really unspool what that infant, what my infant self warehoused. So fortunately, I'm getting there, but it takes a lot of time and a willingness to feel that sorrow, to feel that grief. My first concrete memory was when I was 18 months old, and I arrived in the United States, and I was on the hip of the escort who brought me, who accompanied me across the flight, and I remember very specific details, like as she was, we had already deplaned, but we were on what do they call that? The skyway.
The tarmac?
The thing. Well, no, it's that, the tunnel, from the airplane into the terminal. And, it's quite dim and sort of a blue light. And I remember being on her hip and looking over her shoulder at her feet as they were kicking out behind her and watching them get lighter and lighter, and the light growing more golden, and the sounds getting very, very overwhelming. It was very scary. And then I also remember going into a smaller room where there were still, I could hear a lot of people. I'd buried my face in her neck. And, the acoustics were muffled, but I knew that there were a lot of people, and suddenly it got very quiet. And I pulled my face out of her shoulder and turned around, and there were many people in a semicircle, and everybody was looking at me. Mm-hmm. And I immediately, put my face back in her neck, and I heard people laugh. And of course, to them, it was this charming moment, and to me, it was terrifying.
Yeah. I mean, just the fact that you can remember something so young, to me, suggests that this was profoundly disturbing and traumatic, because most people don't remember their first few years, but this is so etched in your memory.
Mm-hmm. So, and this is the first time that I had a sense of my adopted mother, because I turned around, and as I turned around again, and I remember feeling angry that they laughed at me, because, and I remember scanning their faces, and there was one woman in particular that there was something on her face, and I don't know if it was just expectation or there was just something notable about it. And she started to come out of the crowd to me. And I remembered thinking, not her, anybody but her. And it's funny how, that energy, it telegraphs beyond language and any of that stuff. And so basically the handover was, a physical struggle because she came towards me, arms outstretched. I think in her mind, she had this vision that I would just turn and leap into her arms, and I didn't budge. And so she had her hands on me and she pulled, and everybody kind of laughed because I wasn't going anywhere. And she pulled again, and it quickly grew unfunny. And then there was like the actual moment where she was absolutely tugging on me. I felt, the conviction in her hands. Like I knew that I was supposed to go with this person. I didn't want to go with her. And I remember feeling this betrayal because my escort started peeling my fingers off of, her shoulders. And I remember that last moment when my fingertips slid off and it was just nothing but air. And I thought, I'm done for. Like in my mind, I feel like it was yet another death, like a symbolic death. And from that, the memory goes white. But I do have memories over the next few days of parties and conversations. And I remember when I was growing up, my adopted mom would say, "You don't remember all that." And I would give her details, and she would say, "Oh, these are things I could not have made up."
Mm-hmm. And interesting, again, that you're thinking of the nature of memory, that you don't remember much of anything for a while thereafter. I'm guessing you were in shock and shut down and kind of numb mode, and nothing going in the memory banks for a while.
Yeah. And I do think that when the psyche has that kind of trauma, I think it just puts its nose down and just tries to get through it. The next memory of note was when I was 3. And to be honest with you, like I don't have any proof that it was 3. It feels like it was at that time. The size, my understanding of the world. And there was one night in particular. My parents, obviously, they're white. I was being raised in Wichita, Kansas, and my dad's family especially, were Swedish in origin. So there was no hiding that I was adopted. And I remember one night, all of a sudden, the enormity of it hit me, like how far I was from where I began. And I remember going into my parents' bedroom. My dad was getting ready for bed. My mom was already in bed. And I announced, I said, I'm ready to go back now. And I know.
Oh, that's so sad.
I know. And she looked at me and she goes, "Where?" And I said, "Well, I want to go back home. I want to go back to my mother." And I remember she just kind of looked at me and I know that this was her discomfort and her pain, right? But she kind of laughed and she goes, "Well, honey, you are home and I am your mother and there's no going back." And talk about existential crisis at 3.
Yeah. Because you look at her and there's no pretending that you came from her. There's no pretending that you are of this family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, that again is one of the reasons why I lovingly call this being a control enthusiast. A dear friend of mine gave me that moniker a long time ago, and I've gladly adopted that. And it's because, I've always had that sense that decisions were made for me that were unsafe and, didn't really have a full understanding or respect of who I am or what I wanted. And I realized, as an infant, I was helpless. Right? But I'm always struck by the sense of self and the sense of awareness that was there. And I just kind of had to do what other people decided for me.
Yeah. What do you know about the whys of why you were adopted, why your family went to Korea to get you? What were the dynamics involved with that?
Well, this is a difficult story, and I'm going to go ahead and tell it. And, I want to be very explicit and just stating I am estranged from my adopted family and have been for some time. I did it with love. It was not an easy childhood. And, sadly, my mother in particular, she sustained a lot of abuse that she never healed. And so much of it came out on me. So the story that I'm about to tell you, actually, I was 19 at the time, and it was Christmas Day. So it's with that understanding of, it was not a rosy picture. So, it was Christmas Day, and my mom would often, big days like that, she would often get kind of emotional. And she had two tells that I always knew that something was up. She would either pace or she would get really silent and, kind of glower and seethe. So we had left like the big celebration. It was just us, and I walked in and she was sitting on the couch in the dark, just kind of seething. And I went, oh boy, here we go. And so the upshot of it is this. I was engaged at the time, and my mom, she started off by saying, you think your dad is so perfect, and you think that your husband-to-be is so perfect. And she goes, well, let me tell you how perfect he is. And I had no idea what was coming, but the upshot of it is that he had an affair when they married very young. When he turned 30, he had an affair, and it went on for a prolonged period of time. And when she found out, it was a specific betrayal because it was her best friend. And so at that time, they had my two older brothers, their biological children already, and she told him, okay, you got to stop. And he said, okay, I'll stop. He did not stop. And when she finally had had enough, she said, okay, I'm leaving, and I'm taking the boys, and that's it. And he said, well, you can leave, but you'll never see your sons again. Right? So this is, late 60s in Kansas, very patriarchal. And so, and these are all directly from her mouth, like all of these statements. She said, well, okay, I'll stay, but I get a baby girl. So that was me.
You're a bargaining chip.
Very much so, yeah. And, she's telling me the story at 19, and in it, she manages to take pot shots at two people I love very much. And then also, like throw into question, me, like, great. So it became clear I had a job. Like, I arrived here at 18 months old with a job because in some way I was going to be the one that would make up for the disappointments of my dad and love her unconditionally and choose her and, always take her side in a way that her father had not. And it all became very clear. And that was on Christmas Day, so we can go ahead and say that was...
Yet another existential crisis.
Yeah, it kind of changed everything. It took some time before, and I believe in being direct and being present, and so it took me time before I had an in-person conversation with my dad about it. And I entered into it just as tenderly as I could because, A, this was, how many decades in the past, and then also I wanted to show, just some sign that I understood. And so when I did bring it up to him, he did admit it, and he said, I'm really sorry. And I said, well, Dad, she said one of the things that was particularly hurtful, and I think as a child of abuse herself, she had not really progressed past that point when her abuse started, which was about 8 years old. And so, she said to me at the time, she goes, so just know this, nobody wanted you. Your dad didn't want you. Your brothers didn't want you. Your grandparents didn't want you. I was the only person who wanted you. And when you came here, I was the only person you didn't want. And I remember saying that to my dad. And because, my grandmother is one of the most gentle people in the world. Like, she was a really important counterpoint, to my adopted mom. And I remember telling him that, and he said, he goes, that was not true. And I want you to know that was not true. But that was as much comfort. That was as much support that I got in that. I mean, he refuted what she said, but never once was there I'm so sorry, that this was A, how she chose to share this, and B, that she chose to share it at all. I remember my adopted mom, one of the things that she did try to do was to connect me with other Korean adoptees, and I didn't want any of it. I really did not want to blend because I almost felt twice exceptional, because there was also this implied expectation, and sometimes, a stated expectation that I was supposed to tell them, how grateful I am to be here and to be in that family in particular. And I do think that's, while I can't speak for all adoptees, there's this intrinsic pressure, to make everything seem just idyllic and, like the adopted parents are saviors.
I think of, the natural order of things is that love flows downhill from parent to child. Mm-hmm. And I think in sort of toxic families, toxic parent-child relationships, the parent is insisting that the love flow up.
Yes.
That your job is to love me, to honor me, to, shine glory and awesomeness on me.
Yeah.
And I get the sense that was your role to for the love to flow up and try to fill her up.
I think that's beautifully stated. Yeah, I think that's a really wonderful way to look at it, and I absolutely sense that. And was able to do it to the extent that, a person could, but it fundamentally was not healthy, and it wasn't sane. So that's one of the reasons why, as an adult, that's one of the reasons why I estranged myself, because I'm ready to have and do have relationships that are reciprocal and solid and trusting and supportive, and there's no ulterior motive. There's nothing, there's no obligation. And so it makes me sad, because when I think about what she went through, and what she was grasping for. And, for years I was so angry, because I remembered saying to her at some point in time, and I think it was in the earlier time, was I could have gone to someone good. Mm. And that was just this raw statement that came out. And I remember being so angry,
Yeah.
None of this was my choice. And then, as I've gotten older and learned to heal things, I moved more into a place, definitely, of compassion for her and grace for both of us, because it's a painful situation. This is how we interact as humans. And I think fundamentally, I think that I was probably the only one in the family that could say to her, that is not how this works. Which is why I'm the black sheep, which is why, fundamentally I don't fit into my family's dynamic. Mm-hmm. And I can also say that, I think I love all of them. I really do. I love them from afar. And, and wish them whatever is best and healthiest for them. So it feels nice to have come to that point. But yeah, there was a lot of, power struggle and push back and forth that I think would happen anyway, mm-hmm. But this one was also, it was fraught with a lot of other dynamics that it was never clean.
I think of one of the birthrights of a child is unconditional love. And ideally, that's the state of affairs. Some parents are too addicted or too mentally ill or too psychologically damaged or traumatized or otherwise distracted to give their kids unconditional love. But I do think that is the birthright of all of us. And I wonder if, it sounds like, at least for you, and I'm wondering if for other adoptees too, that's such a common thing to think that the love is conditional, that you're kind of constantly auditioning. You were hired for the job as adoptee, but especially if there's biological kids in the mix, I could see that you would always wonder, am I being loved? Right. Or am I just being fostered or fed and clothed and housed?
Well, I do have good memories of feeling like this is my family, and I do think that everybody did their best. And I think my brothers had a different experience, perhaps because they were biological, but also because of their gender. And I do think, I have 2 sons, and so I know that the mother-son relationship is different than the mother-daughter relationship. And she wasn't at peace with her own femininity. So she's always given deferential treatment to males. And so, I can't speak for my brothers, and I haven't spoken with them in a long time, but I think anytime that, as you said, if a parent is not fundamentally coming from that place of unconditional love, that toll is extracted on the children, no matter how subtly or accidentally. But yeah, to my knowledge, I'm the only person that's ever said to my mom, we can do better. Mm-hmm. And the love that you need, the love that you want is absolutely possible. But you have to take your hands off of the neck, like you can't extract it, you can't squeeze it out, like you have to let it flow. And, for her, this is like high-level stuff. And, we always spoke different spiritual languages. We have energetic languages. So from that standpoint, we were completely mismatched. Mm-hmm. I think there was always this decision for me, and it came from the love that my mother, my birth mother, gave me in that 9 months, that I was okay, mm-hmm. And that I was solid no matter what was happening around me. Mm-hmm. And I am thankful for that, because that's something that a lot of adoptees may not have. And so while these were my challenges, I had that. There are other adoptees who have, far different challenges. And I do think it's fascinating how we respond to these heartbreaks in our lives. And I'm thankful for how I've gotten to this point. Mm-hmm. I think my first depressive episode was in my teens, right? Like my mid-teens. And so, chemically, all kinds of things are happening in the brain. And it just kind of hit. And suddenly everything, there was just a lack of dynamic. And it coincided with my adopted dad. He was going through his own depressive episode. So as a white male in America, it was earth-shattering. So it was mid-'80s, and I watched how he dealt with it, and I knew that I concurrently was going through the same experience, but all the focus was on him, because, again, I wasn't really there for my own experience. I was there to kind of serve them. And I do want to tell you this memory. I remember when it got to the point it felt intolerable, and I believe I was a senior in high school. And, our home was already difficult, but it was just like a really dark place to be. And I remember being in such need, I actually asked my mom for help. And so I came to her and I said, I need to say something. And she said, "What's that?" And I said, I'm not doing well. I think I'm depressed too. And, she said to me, I don't care. She said, "I care about one person in this household, and that is your dad. And I am not here for that. So you're going to have to figure out how to handle that. But I don't want to hear it again."
Wow.
Yeah. That was that was one of my rounds of EMDR.
Do you have a sense, and this may be an unanswerable question, how much of your struggles with depression are, attachment, adoption related versus if you had not had that, I guess what we're getting at is this, does it feel endogenous, inherent, or does it feel like it's coming out of your environment again? Or maybe that's...
No, I that's a very valid question. And I ponder the nature versus nurture piece all the time. It does strike me. And recently I had this thought where I went, oh my goodness, when I was in my birth mother's womb, I put myself in her position, and here she was completely stressed out. She had no support. She had no idea how she was going to do that. And those chemicals, that's what I was steeped in utero. So whatever genetic predisposition I might have already had, that didn't help. I have been, I've experienced just regular old depression. I have experienced clinical depression, like a deep, dark one, and that comes later on, along with anxiety. That was a fun, it was horrific, discovery that came with it sometimes. And then dysthymia, which is basically a low-grade depression. And so I've often felt that the dysthymia, that kind of, melancholy state, I tend to sense that that's more genetic. And I think, I don't know if it was just a matter of a catalyst, like something happened when the attachment issues or the attachment wound got triggered again that, moved me into a deeper, more critical state. I don't know, but I would guess it's nature and nurture.
Mm-hmm. Well, interesting that your first episode corresponded with your adoptive father's depression.
Yeah.
Did that pattern continue into your adult life, that depressive episodes could be linked to, relationship breakups or abandonments or rejections? Or
Absolutely. And I think it's, yeah.
Yes.
Wait, hold on. Yes. Yeah, because I think, and I'm just beginning to understand, the role of the men in my life. I mentioned my ex-husband. He's, as I said, he's a wonderful person, and he remains, he's one of my chosen family. We've raised our sons together. And it's funny because I was the one that initiated that divorce, and that depression, that anxiety was not triggered then. And I do think it was largely because it was my choice. When depression has been triggered in me, it's been because of the lack of presence of someone that I loved and thought I could count on. So that first go round was with my dad. He was already lost in his own struggle. He wasn't there for me in a really difficult home. And I do think that that's why that started. And then later on, after my marriage was done, long over, I had a roughly a 9-year relationship that ended really abruptly. He had his own trauma, and I think that was the only way he knew. And so when he left, I plunged into a very black place, and I lost all of 2014, like the whole year.
That was your deepest, darkest time.
Yeah. I almost didn't make it out of that one.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense, too, if you look back that, your primary wound is attachment and relinquishment. And here you have your life partner, you assume, and you're together for years, and then it abruptly ends. Mm-hmm. Like you lost your rudder, your ballast, your support system, your person.
Yeah. And, I'm taking responsibility, for my relationship choices. I feel like I've either chosen people for whom I loved, but I didn't have that fear that they would leave. But then I didn't want to stay. That was kind of, that was really the hardest part about accepting my part in the divorce was that we were very different, but there was a part of me that I felt trapped in a way. It was not his fault. This was mine. Mm-hmm. Or I would choose people who I knew fundamentally wouldn't be there for me. And those always, carried like the strongest attractions and the biggest, interlocking. And so there was always this dangerous probability that how it ended would happen. And so when it happened, it just, like everything came out. Mm-hmm. And I effectively, as I said, went dark. There was no dynamic, no feeling. Like I wasn't connected to my body. I don't know what I ate. I don't know if I slept. Like it was a year of black. And it was so strange, because when you are in that clinical place, like I was able to still show up and run my business and take care of my people to the capacity that I could, but I wasn't present. There was one incident in particular, and I remember it was in January of 2015, so it was basically it was a little bit over a year, and we had just had a blizzard. And just out of the blue, like I was asleep, I heard this voice, and it sounded like it was in the room with me, so it startled me awake, and then I realized what was happening. So the voice said, "Move, or you are not going to make it." So what that was, I think that was my survival instinct finally kicking in. And so, it was like 4:30 in the morning. And as I said, it was a blizzard. It was right around, 0, 3 degrees, somewhere in there, like really cold, a lot of snow on the ground. And I didn't even think about it. I felt my body. I got out of bed. And I just started layering on clothes that seemed to make sense. Like I hadn't been cold for the whole winter prior or the winter before that because of the depression. I didn't feel it. So I would go out without a coat. And on that particular day, though, I had that thought of, okay, I have to cover, I have to make sure that I'm well covered. And I did. So I layered up and it's dark. There's nobody out there and the snow is still kind of falling. And I just started walking. And it was really surreal and very dreamlike. And, I'm hearing the crunching of the snow and I'm hearing my breath. And then I just kept trusting that voice, like move or you won't make it. So it probably took, I don't know, probably about a half an hour. I was out there for like an hour total. And somewhere in like at that halfway point, all of a sudden I started to feel my body. Right? I could feel the heaviness in my legs with every time I lifted up my foot for the next step and felt my heart start to beat a little stronger. And I felt my breath get faster and more, expansive in the chest and belly. And then I realized I was tired and I was cold. And it was the best thing that I had ever felt, because I had not felt those sensations in a very, very long time. And it wasn't like immediately things got better, right? I got back to the house after about an hour and I realized, okay, I've got like a tiny taste of what it meant to get that slice of light and that, sliver of life back, and I want it. So there were times I did not want to move. There were times that there was so much gravitational force at that point in time. Like, inertia just kind of lets you sink back in. And I just decided, no, I'm here. I'm still here. And so, to this day, walking is one of the best, most healing things that I do for myself, my psyche, just so I can be present and reconnect to that essence of life and joy and light and all that good stuff.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting you say that. One of my favorite books is called Born to Run. And I think that's true for a lot of people, but I think arguably we're all born to walk.
Yeah.
And I do think there's just something so primal, so biological, so wired in who we are, that there's something very healing to the psyche about walking.
Absolutely.
About just being out in the elements and moving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, breathing fresh air and literally not staying stuck. It's a physically empowering thing. And I remember that, my first go around with EMDR and having it be explained, about it being the alternate stimulation of, the sides of our body. And then, fortunately, the practitioner at the time, she said, this is how, we've always been as humans. Like, we've been able to ambulate and walk around. And so the more stationary we get and the more disconnected from that we get, the more we're not incorporating, all of the parts of our psyche. So walking, cycling, anything that really activates both sides of the body alternately takes you into that state. Mm-hmm. So every time I go out on a walk, I'm very, very mindful that this is a time for healing. And I don't bring with me I bring with me who I am, but I also have a bigger understanding of the fact I might be experiencing it, but that's, obviously that's not my true state. Mm-hmm. So it's been a lovely gift.
Yeah. I'm thinking back, I did EMDR for trauma, and therapists said, think of a safe place. And I thought of running through an aspen forest. Mm-hmm. And I said to her, well, could my safe place be moving? Because I imagine the trees coming by me.
Right.
And she said, oh, that's perfect. Yeah, because it was just this undulating trail and the movement. And yeah. One of the themes that we've explored on this podcast and that I talk about a lot with my patients is how do you heal attachment and can it be healed? And that's such a complicated question, but I'm curious, Shae, your personal experience. Mm-hmm. What has been most helpful in that process of trying to address your most profound attachment wounds? What progress have you made on that? What hasn't healed?
Well, it's funny that you ask that, because last year was a pivotal time for me, and yet another renewal. And I spent probably the last quarter of it with that attachment wound trigger, like just ready to go at any moment. And it's reptilian, right? It's like back in the fight or flight. And so I felt my anxiety kind of tick up. And then I realized what was happening. And for the first time, where I'm at, I feel like I was able to say and to commit to paying attention and healing that in a really compassionate way. So I just decided, you know what? I'm going into the belly of the beast and I'm going to try it. So I'll share with you the things that have helped me. The first thing is when we say healing, we often think or fantasize that maybe it means like it didn't happen, right? And you won't ever experience that pain anymore. And so the first thing that I really did was just embrace the fact that these things happened to me, right? Through no fault of my own. This is my experience. I will always have that tendency and that biological response. And I think in finally accepting that and saying to myself, okay, instead of fighting it and being angry, like I'm at this point of peace where I can say, okay, this is my challenge and I accept. So whenever my anxiety kicks up, because that's how it presents now, not so much in depression, but when the attachment wound especially kicks up for me, and it's weird what triggers it, I immediately meet that with acknowledgement. I speak to myself, I speak to that infant, who was so heartbroken and scared and left behind. And I say to her, okay, let's breathe. You're safe. I've got you. I'm paying attention. And by just those simple phrases alone, already I'm paying different attention, and I'm not trying to escape the anxiety. And I've been able to, it's basically a commitment to be uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And it's the most unfun thing that I've ever done.
Commitment to being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It sounds like distance running.
Right, right. And it really is with the bigger picture in mind. And so as it happens, when the anxiety kicks in, my heart speeds up, my mind's racing, and that just that gut feeling of like, oh my God, I'm being left behind. I'm not, I'm not loved. I'm not being seen, and I'm always going to feel this way. And that's the scariest thing about anxiety, and trauma, because trauma doesn't know time. So we're back in that moment. And so to be able to say, okay, I've got you. We're going to breathe, and we're going to feel uncomfortable for a second. And that's okay. Because this is the part of you that wants to be loved. This is the part of you that wants to feel safe and feel comforted. And I'm right here. And we're doing that. And I'm proud of you.
I'm curious to, again, I know you speak just for yourself, but the whole issue of, adopting kids out of your ethnicity or skin color or country, or where are you on that now? Because, again, you had your experience, but you know a lot of people. I mean, do you have some just general thoughts or opinions or wisdom on this idea of, white family adopting a Navajo kid or a Korean family adopting a Russian kid?
Right. That's an excellent question. Thank you for asking me. I've thought a lot about this. And for me, I think the biggest heartbreak and frustration was that at the time I was adopted, I don't think the vetting process was proper. I don't think it was thorough. Given the abuse that my mom had and the lack of therapy and healing she, purposely tried to get for herself and for her own well-being, she should never have been able to have adopted a child. Now, my understanding is that process is much more thorough now. And I will say I know so many adoptive parents who are doing they're doing what they can to meet their child, no matter, various ethnicities and various cultural differences. And they're doing everything they can to pay attention. And it comes from a different place. So to be honest with you, I don't have I don't have this far-reaching statement about how I feel about it. I think the best hope that we can have is if the adoptive parents are doing this, that they are as healed or, like as paying as much attention as they can to the things that have hurt them in their lives first. Mm-hmm. And even concurrently. Because the thing about raising children is, my children are amazing, but they raised me. That's our children's jobs is they actually, do highlight where we need to grow. And so this is not a one and done. So that willingness to say, okay, I can only serve from, this vessel. I'm going to try to make this as healthy and as attentive as I can be for the benefit of that child. I do want to just give a shout out because I will say this, that the adoption advocacy in our country, I can see is growing. And it's really interesting. I've never really wanted to connect with other adoptees. This is new for me. And in opening up, I have a dear friend who basically created a way for me to do this, and it felt safe and it felt supportive. And as I step more into the adoptee community, one of the things that has been the most healing for me, particularly in this last year, which brought me to this healing arc that I'm on now, is writing. I've always been a writer, and writing about the specific topic of being adopted is dicey at best in mainstream media because the adoptee voice is typically silenced, or people want the trope, mm-hmm. right? They don't really want to know about the pain and the confusion because it's difficult. So there is a writing group that I have been a part of for about a year now, and everyone's adopted. And not just, transracial, transnational adoptees. Like there are some people who are domestic adoptees and late discovery adoptees, people who didn't find out until much later in their lives that they were adopted. And this group is really fantastic because, there's just this automatic, unconditional support. There's this knowing, and there is a kinship in it because it is absolutely confusing growing up in a family that is not biologically your own. Even if they do their best, it is a truly, life-altering experience. And so being able to voice that, being able to write it, being able to speak the words when we read aloud in our small groups has been transformational for me. So the name of that group is Adoptee Voices. I'll leave you the information, so I would appreciate it if you would put that, because I know, and it doesn't even matter so much the quality of writing. I think for many people, just the ability to express what happened in words and to be able to name it and claim it is incredibly powerful.
There's something incredibly just therapeutic and cleansing and cathartic about writing. Because otherwise I think, why do we journal? Why do we have patients, clients journal? Mm-hmm. We have this just mess of thoughts and feelings that swirl around mm-hmm. inside of us and parts of us. And I think writing is a way to really crystallize what's going on.
Absolutely. And for the adoptees to say, hey, I was here. I will not be erased, and I'm not going to fit neatly into the picture that you've created. This is my experience. And so I am indebted, to the community for having accepted me immediately. And that's, for someone that has largely lived not feeling like I fit in and making my own place in this world. It's a relief that I'm thankful that I can allow now, because I didn't want that when I was growing up. I couldn't depend on anyone else. That's what, my shadow belief was telling me, that it wasn't safe to trust because that person was fundamentally not going to be there for me, especially if I was in need. Well, now I know that's not true, and I'm very thankful.
I'm regularly asked if it's possible to heal from early attachment trauma. And I would say yes, it is possible to compensate and even to eventually thrive. But this is different than quote-unquote healing. We might imagine our early parent-child bonds as the taproot of the tree of us. And early attachment trauma damages or even destroys the taproot. But then, as the tree grows, if it gets enough nutrients and light and water, the tree can start to shoot out auxiliary roots throughout the soil and make up for that damaged primary root. I see Shae's growing connection to other adoptees as her sending out stabilizing and enriching roots throughout the soil of her life. And these attachments are helping her to grow and thrive. In the show notes of this episode, you can link to our Instagram, which is @BackFromTheAbyss podcast. And there's a photo there of Shae and me after we recorded. And Shae was also kind enough to leave an email connection if any of you want to reach out directly to her. We'll be back in 2 weeks with the second part of this adoption and attachment series. Don't miss it.